Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kathy Fromme, and I'm coming to you today from outside Cleveland, Ohio. I live in Northeast Ohio, where today it is a very rainy January day. Thankfully, it's not snow. I want to welcome you to today's Facebook Live. I titled it From Closet to Keepsake, Incorporating Memories into Quilts and Sewn Projects. So just a little couple of housekeeping tidbits today. Please don't click on any links that are within the Facebook chat. We work very hard to keep out the spammers and other people who put bad things in there. So please don't click on any links within our chat. Do tell us where you're from. Put your name and where you're from, where you're watching from in the chat so we can get to know you all. And if you have questions throughout today's program, make sure to post them in the chat. My team in the background is going to monitor those chats for me since I can't see them while I'm presenting. It's a little hard to do it all at once, but they will apprise me of any questions and bring them forward to me. And then I will try to answer them for you. If there's a question we can't answer immediately today while we are live, we will go back into the chat after the event and catch up with any questions and answers there. So no worries, we keep an eye on those things after the fact. So again, if you're just joining me today, my name is Kathy Fromme. I am a full-time educator with SVP Worldwide. And today's live is Husqvarna Viking Live, and it's called From Closet to Keepsake, Incorporating Memories into Quilts and Sewn Projects. So first off, I'm going to start with the quilt that is hanging on the wall behind me. You can see it. It's the rad work quilt in the background, and I'll give you some little history about that quilt while you're taking a look at it. And this is a nice way to preserve some memories and some family history. So in the larger squares, the squares that are not framed, and yeah, I can't quite reach it, but it's back there. So in the larger squares that are like a beige muslin, those squares are all hand embroidered. Now, my mom grew up in the Depression era, and she learned to embroider on these little squares. She called them penny squares, but after doing some research, that apparently wasn't necessarily a proper term. But basically, stores sold muslin squares for girls and women to practice their embroidery on, and that way, they could just learn on something manageable. So these squares I found in my grandmother's attic when my grandmother was moving out of her home. And I asked permission if I could have them. And my grandmother told me, well, those were your mother's. So, ask her. So I got them. And for a lot of years, they lived in a closet at my mom's house. Well, unbeknownst to her, I got the squares out one day when Husqvarna Viking released a set of embroidery designs called Red Work. And I'm like, those are so familiar. So I had to, go through and find the squares my mom had stitched when she was a young girl. And I got a bright idea to create a joint piece, you might say. So without her knowing, I stitched out my red work designs. Mine are the smaller designs. Back then, we were pretty limited in our hoop sizes on our Husqvarna Viking. I was stitching on my number 1+. So if any of you out there who are watching, remember the number 1+. That was our first sewing and embroidery machine from Husqvarna Viking. And so I needed to make my blocks a little bigger. So I framed the blocks out with some muted red fabrics just to kind of already make it look old. So they had a little bit of a tea dye effect on them. And then pieced it together. And I gave this, it's a wall quilt. It's not a quilt just because of the size of and the number of squares I had to work with. So I gave this to my mom for her birthday. And then she hung it up in the wall. She was very surprised. She goes, oh, I haven't seen those squares in years and years and years, which was true. And one of the things I really urge you to do when you are creating something like a quilt or another gift item that might be kept for generations is to label it. So while I know you can't see the label up close on this quilt, there is a label. It's between the two boxes. It's between the ribbon embroidery attachment box and the quilter's kit box. So between those two red boxes there on the bottom row, the quilt label block is showing there. And it just says that the hand embroidered blocks were stitched with my mom's name, and then I stitched the machine blocks, and I put the years that was done in approximately. So noting and keeping track of things like that is good, whether you're making a brand new quilt for a gift or you are repurposing some vintage embroideries or vintage linens. So I'm going to switch over here to another camera. And on this camera, you can see another piece of embroidered work. This is more of a crewel work. And again, this is a piece from my mom. And she had stitched 4 seasons, and these were framed and they hung forever when I was a younger teen in our home. And when my mom passed away, I took those framed hand embroiders because I can remember her stitching on them, and I thought, well, I want to do something with them, but I did not want to hang them, nor would I leave them framed. So I had a little help unframing them. I have yet to decide what I'm going to do with the actual pieces yet, but I wanted to show you that you can certainly do that. You can take old linens or vintage embroidery. You might have inherited some vintage pictures from an aunt or a mother or a grandmother, and you may want to keep them because they have some good memories, but you may not want to display them as is. So in this piece, there's just the slightest bit of light blue along the fence right here. And I'm thinking, like I said, I haven't quite decided what I want to do with it yet, but I may want to frame these out with a little bit of blue fabric around them. I have one for each season, so I'm thinking I probably would hang them individually. So that'll be a project for me to work on in the future. And then this is just another large piece of vintage needlework that something could be done with as well. So just thought I would share that with you. I know that when I go to estate sales or auction sales, rummage sales, church bazaar sales, there's always a lot of linens, tablecloths, pillowcases, handkerchiefs, all that kind of thing for sale. And, what do you do with it all? Well, if that fits your decor and your taste, then you have it made. But perhaps you'll find something that you can then turn into another project or another gift item. So, and if you aren't ready to experiment on whatever you may have inherited yet, I suggest you buy something at a garage sale or a thrift store even, and experiment on someone else's memories. And that way you don't feel so bad if what you think you're going to like doesn't turn out. So I'm a big proponent of experimenting before you cut into your fabric. So all right. So any questions on that? I'm going to go ahead and put them in the chat if you do. I'm going to just switch up a bit here. And I mentioned talking about labeling your projects. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the software screen for just a moment. I know that our description did not talk about software, but we decided we were going to do a little bit of work in the software today. So surprise for those of you who are just joining us now. We will get back to sewing in a moment. But I've opened up the My Sewnette software, and we're just going to go to a blank canvas. I already have a blank canvas open to save some time, so I'm going to just jump right over to that blank canvas for you. And this is our workspace. And I want to show you how to create a very quick and easy label so that you can put that onto your project. The first step I'm going to do is choose the workspace or my area. And for time's sake, I'm going to choose just the universal hoop group. But know that you can set in the hoop group, you can set this to your specific machine. So if you have a Topaz 40 or 50 or a designer Sapphire 85, an Epic, you can choose your specific machine. But just to be a little more broad today, I'm going to choose the universal hoop group and select a 120 by 120 hoop. That's about 5 inches. So I really don't want my label to be any bigger than 5 inches. Alrighty, so here's my blank space, and across the top, and you can do this in both Mac and Windows. It's just that your tools are in a little different place in Mac, but they all work in the same way. I've gone ahead and touched on the letter ribbon, and here are all my different fonts. But there are over 245 fonts in all 3 levels of the software. And by the way, what I'm doing, I am working in platinum, but I can do this in the silver level. So any of our 3 paid for software programs have the tools I'm going to use today to make this label. Now there's a lot of fonts to sort through, and I'm making a label, and you know, I want to find a style that'll look nice, but I'm not sure about sizing. I want to weed out some of these fonts that are too big. So just to the right of the font choice, you have a font manager. And when you open up Font Manager, you can do a search. And you can either, if you know the name, you can search by name, but I want to search by size. So I'm coming down into the little checkbox here, and I'm going to reduce that size to, let me look for any font that's size 8 millimeters and plus or minus 5 millimeters. So that would give me a 3 millimeter all the way up to a 13. I have to do math in my head. 13 millimeter size font. Now, that means that the fonts that show up in the list will start at that low number. They could go a lot bigger. For instance, in this list I'm seeing here under modern, Arcadia is a 10 to 40. Well, the low number meets my criteria of search. So I'm going to choose, let's come down a little bit into my categories. They still stay in categories for me. And I can preview a category. When I click on the category on the left, here's a preview of what that font looks like. And this is called Antonia, and it is available in sizes 5 to 10 and also 10 to 20. Some of our fonts are digitized in 2 sizes, just to give you a better result. So because I'm intentionally doing a small font, I'm going to stick with the smaller range in Antonia, the 5 to 10. So I'm going to close that, and you'll see in my font selection box that Antonia sizes 5 to 10 showed up here. And over in my letters box, I'm going to type made by on one line and just touch my return for my next. And I'll put my name, and I'll put for, and I'm going to use my niece's name. Her name is Stevie. Now, for prosperity, I would absolutely put in last names and even a date. I'm just going to use, be a little more generic today and use 2022. You know, we're only in day 4 of 2023, and I have not sewn anything in completion yet this year. Done some embroideries, but that's about it. Over to the right, you'll see that the font size always defaults to the small range, to the smallest number of that font. I'm going to bump that up to, I'm going to go all the way to 10, and then click apply. And we can see here that size 10 is going to fill fill my hoop space and give me some room to do a little bit more with it. So I'm pretty happy with the overall size of that font. It looks a little squished though, and I know that's a really, technical term, but my lines, there's not a lot of breathing room between my lines. So I have edit tools, and yes, I could start all over, but I no longer have to start all over with the My Sewnet software. I can right click on my lettering and click edit lettering, and I'm back to where I can choose a different font. Maybe I don't like that. Perhaps I made a spelling mistake. I could fix that as well. I can change my size. And what I'm after though today is I want to increase the spacing, what's called line spacing, so that, there we go, so that those letters are spread out a little bit more. And if it's a little too much, well, then I can adjust it again, go back into edit, and I think maybe 1.4 might be the perfect. Whoops, I went the wrong way. Sorry about that, guys. I went up instead of down. Let's go to 1.4 and click on OK. You can see how easy it is to make an adjustment. All right, so we have that, but it's kind of plain. I can do a number of different things. I have some frames that I can put around the design. So if I head over to my frame tab, I even have frames that are applique. That might work out nice. Let's try this oval and click on apply. Okay, that's one option. That's nice, but I think I want something a little fancier. So I'm just going to click undo, and that took off my oval. I think I want to make a little, I'm going to make a frame, but I'm going to make that frame out of something called Super Designs. And Super Designs are in all levels of our software. They're actually called corners in the category is called corners, in Super Designs. So just as a repeat, I've gone to Super Designs and gone to corners. And I can click on my drop down and find that I have all kinds of choices of corners. I have things with flowers and things with scrolls and things that are in multiple colors. But there's a nice little heart frame here. So I'm going to choose that one and click on apply. Now it did put it right in the middle, but I'm visualizing this as like a corner. And when I put 3 more corners with it, it's going to make a whole frame to go all the way around. Because this is a super design, I can change its size and proportion and make it whatever size I want. I'm making it a little bit bigger, so it basically fills up 1/4 of my working space. So I'm just lining up those edges of the satin stitch with the corner marks, or whether the quadrant marks on my frame. So I'm happy with that. I think I can make that work. I'm going to go back to my home tab and click on duplicate, because duplicate will just make another copy and offset it just a little bit. I'm going to move it up and I'm going to rotate it. And then I'm going to bring that in and see if I'm still happy with it. Now, to get this lined up precisely, I'm going to just zoom up on this area where it matches. And you can see that I'm just moving it with my mouse a little bit. I'm going to just set that so those stitches overlap maybe 1 to 2 stitches. And then let me zoom back out so you can see how nice that looks. I'm going to put those 2 pieces together. And in my film strip on the left, you can see there are 3 elements of my design. So I'm going to select element 2 and 3 and then choose group. And that puts that group together. So it's one whole group. It moves as one. And then I'm going to do another duplicate. And I see I may have a little overlap that I don't need. No, I'm okay. And again, I'm going to zoom up so I can see, I'm off a little bit here. So I'm just going to use my mouse here and bring that down and then zoom back out. There, I'm happy with that. So I will select both halves of my frame that I've created and choose group. And that puts them together. So now I can move the whole thing as one. I'm going to land that in the very center of my hoop. And other than doing some color sorting, just so my machine doesn't stop, 4 times, one for each corner, I'm ready to send that off to my machine. So labels can be quick and easy. There's a lot of tools in our software that can make a frame for you. So you're not just working with the frames. You can use corners. You could even use motifs and do a border around a hoop and make a frame out of that. So make it personal, make it something you like. Now, I do want to share one tip that I get asked a lot about when doing quilt labels or doing small fonts in general. So I want to just take an extra minute to explain this. Every font is digitized for the best result within the size range the font is scaled for. So this font was a 5 to 10 font, and I am doing it fairly small. And in order to make lettering a little bit easier to read when it's very small, I like to change my density of my satin stitch. So the satin stitch that makes up this particular design, it's fairly dense, especially when I look at the numbers. And to do a comparison, I have the letters selected. I'm just going to make a copy, and I'm going to work on the copy over here to the side for you. To edit the density, just right click on the design and go to satin column. Now I can still do this because my letters are still framed around with the green box. So that means I can make changes. When you click on the satin column, you get a property box that talks about everything about the satin column. And in this case, density is right in the middle. Density, the easiest way to explain it is it's how close together the satin stitches are to each other. So the lower the density number, the smaller, the closer you get to 0, the tighter the satin stitch will be. So you'll have more stitches in the same amount of space if you drop your number down. Now I want to do the opposite. I want to increase my density. So I want to actually spread out those stitches a little bit. I'm actually going to jump up 2 numbers and show you the difference there because it's more obvious. We put them side by side here. I think you can kind of see the difference. There's a little bit more open space around, especially around the 2. I'm going to zoom just a small section of that. There you go. You can see that better. That I just have more open space between these satin stitches here. When I select, I have the higher density design selected. I only have 1,940 stitches in it. If I select my original words, I have almost 2,400, 2,395 in stitches on that. So I've got more thread in the same amount of space. And when you're doing small lettering, that makes a big difference, is to adjust that density. So my suggestion for you is to go ahead and make a test, and you don't have to do the whole word or the whole label, rather. Maybe type out one word and duplicate it a couple times, change the density in each one by a number, stitch that out on the same weight of fabric with the same stabilizer that you're going to use, and then take a look at it and see which one you like the best. Because embroidering small fonts can be a little bit of a challenge, and this is one way to make them easier to stitch and easier to read. So I hope that helps a lot for you. I'm going to just get rid of my extra words there, and you can see over on my film strip here, I can choose to sew the lettering first or second. I usually like to stitch from the center out, so I'm going to keep that at stitching out first, but that's another feature in our software. Alrighty, I'm going to change your view. Okay, you're back to seeing me now, and I hope that was a little bit helpful for you on doing small letters and small fonts. I'm going to switch cameras up for just a moment here and talk about a way to save some memories from a guy in your life. And if you, a lot of men used to wear neckties to work. I know that we're a much more casual workplace than we ever were in the past. But neckties are a nice thing. They don't take up a lot of space, and you might want to kind of preserve some memories. Some families have a tradition of giving, a gag tie for every, holiday or a birthday, or they might buy neckties from places they've visited. Like kind of instead of buying a t-shirt that says I was here, they buy a necktie that says I was here. So neckties can be another thing to preserve a memory. So you can take those out of your closet and then put them into a project. So on my workspace over here, I have part of a tie. Now, I didn't have any ties in my house to work with, so I went to the thrift store and I picked up a few ties. I happened to land there on the right day, and everything that was a certain color was half off, and the ties were that color, so I actually got quite a bargain. But I wanted to share something with you. When you take a tie apart, they're actually very easy to take apart, and I took all of them apart that I bought. But if you look on the back side, there's usually a little label or another strip of fabric that the small end of the tie tucks into. Just take that out with a seam ripper. Your trusty seam ripper will be very helpful in this. And then there's usually just a long stitch that's holding the tie folded in half. And just take that out. Comes out real easy. And inside the tie, you might be lucky enough to find this woven interfacing that's kind of on the thicker side. And it's called tie shape. If you were to shop for it, you'd be looking for something called tie shape. It's cut on the bias. And you may not have a use for it, but if you have any friends that sew garments, especially if they sew jackets, this tie shape can be recycled and repurposed. It can be used to make what's called a sleeve head in a garment, or it can be used to line a hem edge of a lined jacket. And it really makes a sharp, crisp look. I know that type of sewing, the more tailored sewing, is not as popular as, surging up some quick things. But if you know anyone with a garment sewer who sews a little bit more structured clothing, and you're going to do a tie project, save that tie interfacing for them. They will truly appreciate it, because it's hard to find, and it's kind of on the pricey side. So I just wanted to bring that forward to you and give you another idea for repurposing. And now we're going to switch over to the machine. Okay. And show you a couple things on what you can do with those ties that I took apart. Sorry, I just need to adjust my chair. So now you're seeing the needle side of my Designer Epic 2 sewing machine. And I wanted to remind you all that when you start a new project, make sure you change your needles. And this is a needle set that we sell. It's called the Best of Husqvarna Viking Sewing Machine Needles. It comes with a pack of universal needles, a pack of denim needles, and a pack of quilting needles. And they're all assorted packs, so they're very helpful to have these in your space at all times. It is recommended that you change your needle every 6 to 8 hours of sewing time. And that is so that you get really good stitch results every time. So needles, think about that little tiny sharp point, goes in and out of your fabric. many times in 6 hours of sewing. So it's time to give a fresh needle for a fresh project. So just a little reminder on that. Now, I have 2 ideas for you on what to do with your ties. See if I can get this into the right visual for you. Let me come out a bit. There you go. I'll zoom back up for you in a minute. What I did is I took my neckties and I cut them in various widths, and the ties were not all the same width or style. So after I took them apart, I pressed them and then just cut them into some strips. I'm working on just a piece of black cotton fabric as a foundation because neckties are often 100% silk and they're very thin. The fabric itself is soft and limp and a little bit. Some of it is slippery, some of it isn't. Depends on if it's textured, but it's a little more to handle because it's cut on the bias. So that's what makes a good tie, is that it's cut on the bias, which means it's on the 45-degree angle of the fabric and it has the most stretch. That's why a tie can be tied and look nice. It has to be on the bias for that. But when you're going to piece it into something else, the bias can be a little challenging to work with. So hence the reason for working with a piece of foundation fabric. How I started this is I just made a rectangle about the size I want for a pillow, and I stitched at one end. I started at the opposite end and stitched down a strip, and then laying another strip on top. Hang on, I have an avalanche happening over here. Let me just move that. There we go. I'm going to lay down my next strip and sew it on. So pretend this one was my first strip and I've got that sewn on. And here's my next strip. Now, I would take the time to press this. When you flip it, you should press it just a bit to make it easier so you don't have as many bumps or wrinkles. Again, you're working with something that is bias cut, and that can stretch just a little bit. Grab a third pin here. I'm just going to put a couple pins in. I don't typically sew with pins, but I find when I sew on TV, when I'm live, sometimes I need some extra help. So let me just wake up my screen here. Now, I'm using a straight stitch and the A foot, and the A foot does call for me to use my integrated dual feet, so I have engaged that. And the seam allowance I'm going to use is the outside edge of my presser foot. Let me just anchor this down so I can zoom for you. There we go. And I have turned on my laser. Let me turn it off and turn it back on again. And I have set my laser to be right along the outside edge of that presser foot. That's going to be my seam allowance as I sew. And I'm also engaging my needle down. And I'm just going to sew. Now, some of these seams were already in my tie, so I just have to make sure I keep them flat. And I am sewing off to the side of my machine, so forgive me if it looks like I'm sewing crooked. It's just the way I'm sitting. When I get to the end, I'm using my selective thread cutter. Pull that back and away from my machine, and then I can flip it over. Now at this point, I've made essentially new fabric out of my ties. Again, let me back off a bit. There, now you can see my new fabric. And I would turn it over and take this to my rotary cutting station and trim off all my outside edges. And then from here, I can use that to make a pillow, or I can make a bag. I could do pretty much anything I want with this fabric. So not only is it a good way to preserve a memory of someone, but it's also a great way to upcycle. So that's one way you could use those ties. Another way you could use them, a little more creative, is to make a crazy patch. So crazy quilting or crazy patch embroidery, and you can do embroidery as well, starts off with a shape that has an odd number of sides rather. And I have gone ahead and basted down my shape here. So this is just 5 sides, and I just basted that down with some contrasting thread so you could see it easier. And the principle is very similar. Instead of going along one edge all the time, I'm just going to go along any edge and lay my next piece of fabric on top of that raw edge. Again, starting where this piece ends, or begins rather. I've got my laser lined up, so it's going to be easy to watch and see, to keep that nice and straight. When I reach the end, I'm going to cut my thread and then flip this back. Okay, so that's how you get started on it. And for the sake of time, I already have done an entire round on this piece. You can see that I just took different sizes, different widths of my pieces of tie around. Once I got all the way around, I trim my edges close. So I'm ready to add another side to this piece. Let me show you that and show you how to trim. Well, hold on just a minute, guys. I realized that my pin was only holding that patch in place, like it wasn't actually where it needed to be lined up. So, the best laid plans. So let me just take 2 seconds and start again for you. See, your seam ripper is indeed your best friend. Alrighty. So, there. Now I'm lined up. I realized I would have flipped over my piece and it would not be attached. Okay, so here's my piece sewn, and then I can just flip that back like so. And I would take this to my ironing station and iron it, press it flat. And then as far as trimming this, I am looking at this edge. And I'm just going to use this ruler as a visual for you because I know the fabrics are kind of dark. It's hard to see. But lining that ruler up against that edge, that's going to show me where I'm going to cut. Now, I'm not going to use my rotary cutter to cut that off because I'm, again, working on a foundation piece. Instead, I would use that as a guide and take my scissors and then just trim this off, trim that fabric off. And I would do that after I pressed. Then you continue to just work your way around your crazy patch until you filled your base fabric. So from here, it doesn't matter. You can go counterclockwise, you can go clockwise, you can go opposite. Doesn't really matter what you choose to do, and it doesn't make a difference if all your strips are the same direction. So there are 2 options for you on what to do with neckties. Alrighty, let me come back to you and check and see if we have any questions. So let's see. I'm seeing a couple people said hi. That's wonderful. Hi back to everybody. And I don't see any specific questions. If you do have something, just be sure to put it in the chat. And our behind the scenes team, Amy, Meredith, and Ryan will get those questions out to me. Alrighty, let's switch back and come over here and talk a little bit about photo stitch. So photo stitch is another way to bring a memory onto fabric. And this is a photo of my father-in-law, and he is still living. I took this embroidered sample to show him over Christmas, and he's like, he goes, "That's me." I didn't tell him. I didn't preface this with anything like, "Who is this?" or anything. He says he recognized it right away as his official photo from the Marine Corps when he joined the Marine Corps. And this can be done in our software. I do believe we have a MySewNet software with photo stitch scheduled in the next upcoming months, or if not, we may have one that you can go back and watch our recordings either on social media or on our YouTube channel to see that. So incorporating photo stitch, another great way to bring memories into a project. If you are not working in the software, you can indeed still work with fabric and work with photo transfer. Now this is an old piece, so it has faded because it was displayed for a long time. The little boy in these pictures is now 20, almost 24 years old, grown up, graduated from college and has a job. So, but these are photos of the first summer we spent together, and just some different memories. We went to his kindergarten graduation, a trip to a local county fair, a trip to, let's see, the zoo is on here, just different things like that. So doing photo transfer is another fun way to bring memories into your sewn projects. And this one also does have a label on the back. I just labeled it Summer Fun. And then I listed all of the locations where all the photos were taken. And I made this for Zach's, my husband's, for his birthday. This is his son, so my stepson. So that's another nice way to bring photos into your project. Good way to bring memories in. Okay, so let me just check my list. So, so a question is, my mom has many silk scarves. Any ideas for sewing on silk, maybe for a pillow or another project? So silk scarves are in that same idea of the ties, because most of the ties, in fact, all four of those ties were silk fabric. I was surprised none of them were polyester, but they were all silk. So they're typically fairly thin once you take them apart. And the recommendation for the scarves, because they're going to be even thinner than the tie fabric in most cases, is you may want to back them with another lightweight fabric before you turn them into your project. Oftentimes the scarves will have a pattern on it, maybe a floral or a border, and you could be selective about what part of the scarf you incorporate into a project. The same thing would apply to if you're doing a vintage embroidery that is not so stable. So the blocks behind me, the ones that are hand stitched, some of those were on some pretty thin muslin. And remember, it was the Depression era, so muslin was one of those things that was precious, and it was also fairly thin at the time. So I backed all of the hand embroidered blocks before I stitched them. I backed them with a good quality broadcloth. I just used a cotton poly blend broadcloth. You could certainly use all cotton, For the silk scarves, you don't want to go too heavy unless you're looking to add a lot of stability to them. But I would choose a fabric that still has some drapeability, but a little more structure to it. I think your broadcloths are a good choice. I'm trying to think if, I suppose you could back them with a satin fabric, but I don't know if you're going to get the stable look you're after. But I could certainly see vintage scarves trimmed, especially if they're, like a stripe or a border print, and turned into a pillow or even a handbag. That could be a lot of fun, is to have a handbag made of vintage scarves. So, photo transfer, question on that. It's not something that we do in our stores, but many sewing retailers do carry photo transfer supplies, and you can do it a number of different ways. There's an iron-on product. There is a product that you can print directly on. It's specially treated fabric that goes into your inkjet printer, and it prints on there. And then some of them have to be set, usually with a hot iron, so the ink sets permanently in there. Some are more of like a vinyl transfer. So there are a lot of different products in there. Most of your big box fabric and craft stores will carry them. Some dealers may carry them as well. So please check your local retailer for more information on that. Okay, let's see if I've caught up with our questions here. All right, looks like for the moment we are, but if you do come up with something else, just speak up. Another popular project to work on is, let's see, I want to show you on here first, is to use a shirt. Typically you see this with a man's shirt, like perhaps a flannel shirt. And, whoops, I have that upside down. And save that and turn that into a pillow. You see a lot of that on Pinterest. So I just have a couple tips for you on working with a shirt. If you want to keep the buttons on, but not use the buttons as a way to get your pillow in and out, I would recommend that you stitch down the placket of the shirt so that you can, your pillow won't pop out of there. Just give me a second here. So over at the machine, the easiest way to stitch that closed is to use your zipper foot. Let me just get that zipper foot on. The zipper foot is, I'm using is an accessory, not the zipper foot that comes with the machine. It's one of the additional accessories. It is long and skinny. It's called a narrow zipper foot. Let me show that to you on camera better. It can be applied either on the left or the right side of the machine, so you can get your needle position exactly where you need it to be. I'm going to have it off to my right. There we go. And I'm coming back over to my machine screen, and I'm going to bump my needle position way out as far as it'll go. Because this is a 9mm machine, I can take this all the way out to the position of 4.5. And make sure you can see things all right. So I stopped stitching right about here. I did a little bit already for you. Just because I'm not going to take the time to change my thread, I'm going to increase my stitch length so that I can take that out when I'm done. And I want to ride the foot right up against the placket, and my needle will land in the overlap of that placket. So I need to bring that laser light back over so I can make use of its guidance. So I'm going to bring that laser. I love the fact that the laser is so adjustable. And the laser is on our Designer Epic 2 and our Epic 95Q. That is our sewing only version of the machine. And it's just wonderful. I don't really know how I sewed without the laser in the past. But I have my laser set up so it's right along the edge of that placket. And like I said, I'm going to just sew with a little bit longer stitch. And so that. Try to keep my hands out of the way for you. And again, I don't want to sew over any pins. I put a pin right at the end because I am going to pivot and sew across this band so that when I sew the final seam, then I don't have anything to worry about as far as so I've stitched this closed on the end so you don't have any gapping there. And then the back of the pillow, I just cut from the back of the shirt. I cut 2 rectangles, overlap them just a bit so that I have a space to turn that inside out. I'm not going to put a zipper in this. I could if I wanted to, but an overlap back is just fine. Then I would put my front and my back right sides together and clip or pin that around. Stitch it with about a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then I can turn my pillow out through the back of my shirt. So that's another nice way to have to keep a memory going is through using shirts. And let me see, still have a few minutes left, so let me talk a little bit about t-shirt quilts. I realize that t-shirt quilts could be a whole class, probably even longer than 1 hour. I have made a few. I've done a lot of softball t-shirt quilts for my niece who plays, she now plays at the collegiate level. And so as her friends, older and younger than her, have graduated, between the two of us, we've made a bunch of t-shirt quilts for them. So just some tips and hints on t-shirt quilts. Is sometimes you get lucky and a t-shirt has a screen print on both the front and the back. So I'm not real sure how I will end up using this t-shirt. My stepson was in marching band, so I have a lot of marching band shirts from him. It's a really big design, and I'm either going to do like a tall, narrow block, or I might cut this particular one into sections. So that's something to keep in mind, is that just because it was printed, as one, you don't have to use it that way. You can cut it apart and add some additional fabric to it to sash it. But you first have to start off by prepping your t-shirts, and that means cutting them apart. And I have also discovered that at least on a lot of team shirts, there's often a logo on the sleeve. So don't toss those sleeves without seeing if there's something that you might want to use from the sleeve. Now, t-shirts have to be stabilized in order to make them easy to sew with. And just using a lightweight fusible interfacing it's the least expensive way to go. When you're doing a lot of t-shirt quilts, is just to buy the least expensive lightweight fusible interfacing. If you have a t-shirt that has, like this t-shirt has raised print on it, it's very thick, almost like a vinyl, put down a press cloth that is a non-stick type of press cloth. So I have a silicone press sheet, because when you fuse your interfacing, even though you're fusing to the wrong side, of course, you don't want to lose any of the vinyl to your ironing board surface. That can happen. Ask me how I know. So get out that press cloth and put that down first to protect the lettering. And then don't move the t-shirt till it is cooled down a bit. If you peel this off of your ironing board while it's still hot, you might lose a little bit of your vinyl lettering. So let it cool, and that'll also allow your interfacing to adhere fully to the shirt. And then the next step is you've got to mark out the size that you want your block to be. So this one I have set to 14 inches. So I cut two sides of it already. I cut the bottom edge and I cut the side edge. And I pencil drew for you so you could see it on camera that I drew on the t-shirt where to cut it. Now, if you want to use something that's quick and erasable, you can use the friction pens, and they will go away with the heat of the iron. So if you draw a line on it and you don't want that line to be there, which I realize that's out of camera view, sorry about that, then I can just iron that off and it'll go right away. So you've fused your t-shirt, and now you're going to trim it down to size. And then once you have your blocks arranged, use the top of, use your bed or use the floor to lay them out and get your placement just how you like it. And then you're going to stitch them right sides together. So we will just pretend that this one is cut all the way around. And I have found that with the t-shirt knits, I use a size 90 stretch needle. I got the best results. The seam isn't that thick, but once you start putting rows together and then matching rows to another row, you end up with a lot of thickness, and the interfacing adds another level. So a 90 stretch needle I found works pretty well for most of the t-shirt quilts. And if you need to increase the size of your blocks, if you have some blocks that are smaller than others, then it's perfectly fine to use either the pieces of the t-shirt that you aren't using, like if the back is plain, or maybe the bottom hemline you could use. I've also just used matching quilting fabrics, solids or prints that fit the theme, and added them in to make the blocks more even size. There's no real rules in t-shirt quilting. Anything goes. So you can have small blocks and big blocks and filler blocks and all kinds of fun things. Like I said, just a couple quick tips for you to fill out the day on preserving your memories. And we could do an entire, probably more than 1 hour class on just doing t-shirt quilts. All right, so just a couple reminders for our next My Sewnette Facebook Live is next week on January the 11th at 2 p.m. Central. That is with Wendy Owens, and she's going to feature the sketch module. So the sketch module is one of those kind of overlooked modules, but is so creative. Can't wait to see that myself. So join Wendy next week, January 11th at 2 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Eastern. And that is that's the My Sewnette Facebook Live. Then the next VSG. So for our gallery stores, that live will be on a Tuesday. It's January the 17th at 2 p.m. Central Time. And you'll be joining Meredith, who's usually behind the scenes, but we have her out on camera doing Facebook Lives for our Viking sewing gallery stores. And her topic is sewing tools you should start using. So we all have things in our sewing toolbox we're not using. And then the following day, so it's a treat, you get 2 Facebooks in a row. The next one is January 18th, which is Wednesday. Again, same time, 2 p.m. Central. That will be with Karen Charles. And she is going to talk about photo stitch. I knew we had a photo stitch coming up, Meredith. Thank you for that. Learn how to incorporate the photo stitch wizard into your quilts. So I showed you a little preview of one photo stitch, and Karen's going to take you through the entire process. So make sure to join Karen and Meredith and Wendy in the next 2 weeks. There's a lot of good sewing knowledge coming your way. Thanks for joining me, and have a great day.